Recording live from northwest suburbs of the Twin Cities in Minneapolis. Recording live from the northwest suburbs of Minneapolis. This is Twin Cities Affiliates. I'm the host and the creator, LaShawn, aka Coop DeVille. And on this episode, I'm very excited for this episode. I have a man who is an author, who's a Minnesota sports historian. This man has done a lot. He was also a former referee for high school basketball, refereed some of my games. This brother has done a lot, with the history of baseball in this state of Minnesota. And without no further ado, Mr. Frank White. All right, this is introducing the famous Mr. Frank White. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I appreciate that, LaShawn. I don't know about famous, man. I'm just Frank White from the Rondo neighborhood, man.
Well, definitely. Well, Frank, Mr. White, I just want to personally commend you because I know some of the work that you have done, and this is why I wanted you on the show. And just before we get started, just to let you know, this is to pinpoint Minnesota pride, Twin City pride, the rich history and things that are going on now. And what I do to start off with everybody that I have on here, I always start off with how they became a Twin City affiliate. Now that's the name of the podcast. And a Twin City affiliate is somebody that was born and raised here or someone that moved here and lived here for, over about 3 years. So explain to us how you are a Twin City affiliate.
So Sean, I was born in 1945.
Okay.
So my father is African American, and his family came here in 1896.
Wow.
To St. Paul. So my roots on my father's side go way back. Okay. And along that heritage of my father's family, they've been actively involved in St. Philip's Church when it in fact was, and in Irvine, and my father grew up in St. Paul and went to Mechanic Arts. Okay. Him and his brother, my uncle Rock, Eugene White, were both named to be one of the top 100 athletes in the first 100 years of the St. Paul City Conference.
Wow.
My mother's family is from Mexico, and her family came here in the 20s. Mm-hmm. And when they came here, my grandfather was one of those people that lived on the west side, Mexican Americans or Mexicans at the time, would always go to help fix things with whatever was going on when they were being mistreated. And through that, he actually, because there was no consulate here from Mexico at the time, the nearest consulate was in Chicago.
Gotcha.
The Mexican government actually made my grandfather the honorary consulate to Mexico. And so he was the one that actually dealt with City Hall and people's struggles, and he became a very well-known individual on the west side. And for people that are maybe familiar with that, there is a church there called Our Lady of Guadalupe. Mm-hmm. One of the founders of that church. So wow. It's a Catholic church on the west side of St. Paul.
Wow.
There today, it's a newer church, but it's on Concord Avenue in St. Paul. Some people would be familiar with that. So I go back to 1945, and I'm blessed to be here today. I like what you're doing, and one of my goals as I've retired from working, I still work, but in a couple of contractual ways. But one of my goals and my passions is history, but I want to make more people aware of African Americans, and especially those that have had a significant impact on Minnesota, and
Exactly.
or the Twin City area, but overall Minnesota, because there are people that lived all over the state, and sometimes we just don't know about them. So
Right. And, going into that, like, it just always, I don't know, bothered me, or just I would scratch my head because I was born and raised here. You knew who my dad was. He was from Vicksburg, Mississippi, and my mom was from Crawford, Mississippi, and they moved up here. And I always, just naturally just represent where you're from, and the people that my dad surrounded me with, my mom surrounded me with, and it was just always like a taboo for people to say they were from here, or they wanted to claim they were from Chicago and they moved here when they were 5 or something. But it just go a little bit deeper into how there was such a rich history of Black people, not just in St. Paul and the Rondo community, even though that alone is a rich history, but just in other areas, because I'm just learning that there was a lot of us in rural areas that were helping out with farms and all kinds of things, like Fergus Falls I just learned about. So can you just touch a little bit more on that?
sure. So I think that first of all, I was just talking to Verlene Booker, and actually her name is Price. And
Okay.
and if people are familiar with Golden Time, her daughter is Stephanie, one of the owners, her and Michael at Golden Time Coffee Shop.
Okay, yep.
So, but Verlene's brother was a guy named Harold Price, who was an outstanding baseball player. So I stay in touch with her, and one of the things that I talked about yesterday. So a little bit longer answer, but I want to go back to when people first came here. African American people, Black people, Negroes at the time lived closer to downtown St. Paul. In fact, some of the business owners had businesses down there. Phil Reed, who was the owner and that had the St. Paul Colored Gophers baseball team.
Right.
His business, his saloon, was on 3rd and Cedar, which today 3rd Avenue is Kellogg Boulevard, and it looks completely different. But it made sense to me when I found out all of those things, why his business was right down there by the depot. So when I came here, they were able to capture, where is it that I can go? Where is it that I can live? And a lot of African Americans lived in Sweet Hollow, and in that area that right now we would say is the down by Regents Hospital, and maybe a little bit east of there. So as people came here, they connected right away to, as soon as they got off the train, or maybe they even came up on the river.
Right.
So before airplanes and all of that, or before air travel. So that was primarily how, as people came here and they migrated here, they really went to a place where they would feel most comfortable. And in that, even going back to the 1880s and the early 1900s, we've had significant individuals along the way that have helped shape not only St. Paul's history or Minneapolis's history, but also Minnesota. We've got people like, I've got an exhibit coming up at the Capitol sometime soon. It was supposed to be last year, but there's a gentleman named Billy Williams, who was a baseball player, great athlete, graduated from Mechanic Arts High School in about 1898, and at the time played baseball all over the state of Minnesota because he was such a great player. He looked a little bit like he was native, so if you saw a picture of him, you may not know. In fact, his great nephew is Dr. Joe Gothard, who was the superintendent of schools and he grew up in Wisconsin. But so Billy Williams great baseball player. He was offered in the early 1900s, about 1904, 1905, a contract to play for the Baltimore Orioles.
Wow.
But you know, at the time, we had segregated baseball in this country.
Exactly.
And so they said, well, we'll sign you, but if you play, you'll have to say that you're, today we would say native, but at the time they said you'll have to say you're an Indian. Said, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm proud of who I am and I'm not going to be somebody else.
Right.
1905, he actually went to work for Governor Johnson, who had was newly elected. And from there, and here's one of the things that, again, is underrepresented in our history. Billy Williams would go on to work as the assistant to 14 consecutive governors that were either Democrats, Republicans, or from the farmer labor.
Wow.
So 52 years he worked at the Capitol. So he is the longest employed person in state capitol history. And we don't even know about that.
We don't even know about him.
And so he was a great athlete, but I think his legacy is beyond that to have worked. If you went to meet a governor at the Capitol, you had to meet Billy Williams first.
Say his name again, so the audience will know.
It's William, and then his nickname, he went by Billy.
Okay.
Frank Billy Williams.
Wow.
And so
definitely look that up and get some more information.
Yeah.
It's just remarkable. We don't hear about that.
Oh, I think for me, in finding out some of these things, you know, you just imagine. So every day he worked with the governor, and he was well respected because of his baseball career, especially in the greater metro area. He played in Chaska, and I mean, so he played all over. So you know, at the time, baseball was the sport in Minnesota, and but to go on and work with a governor every day, and today, and even then, that was a political appointment. So if you can imagine, you know, a new governor would come in, and they continued to keep Billy Williams.
Right.
That said something about who he was, right?
Yeah.
And different parties. But imagine the impact that I'm assuming he had. One of the things, unfortunately, is there's not a lot of documentation that says, well, Billy helped the governor decide this.
Right.
But in some of my research, I do have a pending article that will be coming out from Ramsey County at some point in time. We're trying to get through this COVID thing to complete some additional research on them. But one of the things that I know, there was as we talk about people living other places, there was an attorney that lived in Bemidji.
Wow, okay.
Why Bemidji? So he came here, and when he came here, there were two other pretty prominent attorneys at the time, Frederick McGee and
I just looked up information on him the other day.
Yeah, and then I think the other guy was Wheaton, I believe, was his last name. And I could be incorrect on that because, again, right now I'm just kind of
off the top.
But anyway, this attorney that came here, they talked and said, you know, a third attorney, it would be difficult because there weren't very many people here to work here in the Twin Cities. So he moved to Bemidji. But he became a friend of Billy Williams. And so when the issue happened in Duluth, where several people got hung.
I think you're talking about, was it the circus workers?
Exactly.
Got hung in Duluth?
Yeah. So one of the things that happened is Billy Williams reached out to his friend in Bemidji to go up and help represent those people. So he helped get the people off that in the trial that got off from it and didn't get done. So again, there's another impact. What this guy happened to know somebody and ended up helping out some people he didn't even know, but because of who he was, he wanted to make sure people got a fair trial and that type of stuff. So we have so many stories like that of people that have had an impact, have helped legislation, but we don't know about them. And the unfortunate thing is, in our schools,
Mm-hmm.
don't teach about that. I never learned about that stuff in high school or junior high. You probably
Right.
didn't either. And today, our kids don't even. So I'm trying to work with some of the schools, again, to get them to recognize some of these
Good.
individuals. I think it's great that when we write about Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or other individual, and if we talk about sports, Satchel Paige and different individuals. I mean, they're all great, and I'm glad that we do that. But we have a rich history, and I'll go back to what you said earlier going on. We have a rich history here.
Mm-hmm.
We teach our kids from Minnesota, our kids from St. Paul, Minneapolis, or throughout the state about these individuals that have had a big impact on who and have helped shape Minnesota. I'm kind of disappointed in that. So I'm trying to work with some schools to do that, and I'm having a little success, and
Good.
and maybe we'll get there. We'll see.
And it's a must thing because, like, I know that you wrote a book. They played for the love of the game, and then you had a very nice panel discussion about 4 years ago, which I was present at, and I was learning just from that panel discussion. There was a Negro League or other types of baseball leagues for, at that time, Negroes, that what we were called. And I was learning about Black teams in rural areas, St. Paul, Minneapolis, all over Minnesota. So was that your motivation and your purpose for writing the book and having those panel discussions, for that knowledge to come out?
Absolutely. And again, my goal is to help people be more aware of our history.
Mm-hmm.
And because we don't know, and to be honest, I didn't know a lot of this history either until I really started researching. Part of my research included I've looked at Black newspapers all the way back to 1888.
Yes.
And up until the mid 50s.
And there was a lot of them.
Oh yeah, exactly.
I just learned this about that last week. It was a lot of them.
Oh, and again, we don't know that. I mean, that's one of those things that, when you look at the daily papers, and we all know about the spokesman, and which is is the oldest Black business still in Minnesota.
Right.
And people don't know that.
Yeah.
But again, they've been around for a long time. And people like Jimmy Lee or Jim Griffin or named Harry Davis, and not the Harry Davis from Minneapolis. This Harry Davis, it was actually related to Verlene Booker, and going back to her. But he also wrote in the St. Paul Echo a little column, and then Jimmy Lee wrote from the mid 30s through the 40s, and then Jim Griffin, who was our former police chief, ended up writing in the 50s. They all wrote sports columns, and because of their work, some of the stuff that I have found out, I wouldn't even know if they didn't have that small column and
Yes.
about some of the individuals that were outstanding sports people here.
Wow. I mean, it's just remarkable just hearing, and that's why I have you on here, because I wanted to just hear these stories and this information that a lot of us just don't know. And it just blows your mind. It'll make you, for me personally, it makes me feel really, really good about myself and the state of Minnesota, of our presence here through the history. Like you say, it goes all the way back. You personally, your history goes back 1890s. Like, that's remarkable.
Yeah, and it took me again some time to research that, and actually on my grandmother's side, who is from Leavenworth, Kansas, I've had somebody help me. We've traced her family back, her mother's family, to 1791.
Wow.
And that's unbelievable. But we've got some other athletes, and sometimes people won't know these names because they're older. In the last several years, we had a gentleman named Bob Blakely that passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Bob and his brother, Dick Blakely, were outstanding athletes. Dick Blakely went to Marshall when it was a senior high, and he graduated, I believe, I think it was 1952, and he was the first Black person named to the St. Paul Lions Club Amateur Athlete of the Year award back in 1953. So I know that because when some time ago, I forgot how many years now we've been doing the Winfield Award, but we created the Winfield Award because at the time we did this, I think we're around 40 years. At the time we did it, we felt that our kids of color weren't getting an opportunity to be involved with the Lions Club Award or Mr. Basketball or some of the other awards. We didn't feel we're getting equally represented, and now we've done that, and we're successful. I have to tell you that when we first started, I would have never guessed that we would still be around 40 years later or whatever number we're at. But a part of that is we honor kids of color every year, 10 of them, and help provide them with a stipend to go on to college. But let me go back to Bob Blakely. So Bob Blakely, he graduated from St. Paul Central.
Okay.
He went to the University of Minnesota and was a halfback, running back, just like his brother, Dick. Well, in 1956, and people can Google this if they want, he led the Gopher football team in rushing with 325 yards on 65 carries. So that's 5 yards a carry.
Wow.
Well, running backs before him and after him carried the ball like maybe twice as many times or 3 times as many times. Paul Gill and Bob McNamara and some of these names that were very good white athletes. So in an interview with Bob one time, I interviewed Bob and Floyd Smaller and Bill McMore, who was from Minneapolis, also an outstanding athlete. So I said to Bob—
Floyd Smaller is one of the people, just for the audience, that created Rondo Days along with Mr. Anderson, Roger Anderson.
Exactly. And Floyd was an unbelievable athlete. I mean, he just, and people don't, people know him maybe as Coach Smaller or whatever, but you'd have to be a little bit older to even understand how good of an athlete Floyd was.
Wow.
But so Bob, in this interview, I said, Bob, I said, man, I looked up this, you led the Gophers, led the team in rushing for a season. I said, so how come you didn't carry the ball that many times? I said, did you guys pass a lot or what was going on? He said, they only let me play in the fourth quarter.
Really?
So,
wow.
I mean, so think about that. And then when Bob left the University of Minnesota, he went on to play professional football. So he was an outstanding running back.
Yeah.
But because of the times, even in the 50s, they would only put him in to play in the fourth. I mean, imagine if he would have played the whole game.
And that's what when you were just saying that, and then just imagine like the poise that you have to have, knowing that they're doing it for a certain reason. So, like you just had to. I just can't even put myself at that time with knowing what I know now and all of that. It's just extreme times to think like that.
It is so hard to imagine, and when you think about how people that are even older than me, how they persevered and how they succeeded and how they bought a home. I mean, if you can imagine that Pullman porters or red caps would make like $17 a month plus tips. I mean, even if that goes back to the 30s or the 20s, I'd like try to think what $17 a month, and people were buying homes and and providing their families with things. I can't imagine, you know, and then the indignities that they had to go through. Just, you know, if somebody was going to tip them, or they called them, I think one of the references, they called him George. Everybody was George. If you were a poem reporter, everybody called them George for reasons, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure they called him other things too.
Of course.
And so if think of the indignities that people had to go in, and I think sometimes younger people, because we can't imagine, I can't imagine, I lived through some of that, but I can't imagine, you know, the things that people used to say to my father, and I would be there, and I was like, well, or I remember Steve Winfield and myself went to see my father, who at the time worked in downtown Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. On the elevator with this guy, didn't know who he was, went in to say hi to my father, and I saw this guy was there, and my dad had to go talk to him to order something. I don't know all of the details, but when we left, we came down on the same elevator.
Right.
At the time, Steve and I were at the University of Minnesota, and the guy was on the elevator with us. He said, "Oh, you guys know Lou, huh?" He said, "He's a good old boy." And I looked at Steve Winfield and I said, "Man," I said, "my dad is at whatever age he was. He's in his 40s. I said, "How long do you think my dad has to be a good old boy?" And the man turned all red. And as soon as the doors opened, man, this guy like literally ran out of the elevator. And we weren't going to do anything, but I mean, insult to me. And I grew up at different times. My dad would be playing ball, and people would call him a nigger, and it just, you know, it's so degrading, so degrading, and but yet every day my dad went to work, and he knew he had to provide. So sometimes he may not have confronted it like maybe we would today.
Right.
You know? And because he had that commitment to take care of his family. And there are people like my father that had to do that. So literally we stand on their shoulders. Mm-hmm. We stand on their shoulders, and I often wonder, is that important to us? You know, do we ever think and reflect? I know people like today travel all over. Young people today play on all of these AAU teams and all of that, and they get an opportunity to travel all over. Mm-hmm. Don't even think about it. You know, back in my father's day, you literally had to make a plan to travel because you didn't know where you could stay.
Exactly.
You could eat. You didn't know where you could buy gas. And I mean, there were so many challenges. And in some places, if you drove through town and they saw who you were, they were liable to stop you.
And this is why I say we have such a rich history. We have, with all what you explained and what your dad went through and other people went through, they were still able to perform at a high level, have character, be gentlemen, all of these things. And that is just shows the richness of our history. And I think more of the younger generation needs to take honor in that, because that's power. That's power to stand on those people's shoulders.
Absolutely, and sometimes stand up a little bit straighter, because even today, you know, we have to go through indignities and those kinds of things, and perceptions of who we are, or
exactly,
or if you're a certain color, or those kinds of things. It's like you can't be certain. I mean, even recently, I don't know if you've captured some of this, but you know, not too long ago in the media, they were talking about African Americans being quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, it's still it.
And you couldn't be, or in fact, you couldn't be in college. In fact, Floyd Smaller was an outstanding quarterback, and when he went to the U, they weren't going to play him, so he actually left. Mm-hmm. Again, it's we couldn't play because we weren't smart enough.
Yeah, and they still, the powers that be still hold on to that position, because they'll allow us to play quarterback, but it's always some kind of stench that they put on with the black quarterback. You know, if he's a running quarterback, that's negative, or he's not a team guy, or how he dresses, or something. It got to be something that the quarterback is doing wrong. So they still hold on to that position and want somebody, you know, that's white to be higher up then. And if somebody is better, then, you know, all fairness, but it's like they still hold on to that for some reason.
Yeah, and Tony Dungy, I just saw a letter that Tony Dungy wrote to the owners of the NFL, and also was talking about, you know, people being coaches, head coaches, and still underrepresented.
Yeah.
And when Tony was here, Tony's a very gifted athlete. He played on our intramural basketball team. I'm older than him, but as he was a younger guy, you know, we continued to play for a while. And so I think one of our last years, we said, okay, we're going to do this one more time. And Tony was actually on the team. And you know, Tony, you know, we've continued somewhat of a relationship over the years. If we know he's in town and we can get a chance to go say hi, we do.
Good.
What a great man for all of what he's done. And he's adopted kids and the things that he does in community. I mean, you know, here's an individual that doesn't have to do that. But again, it just shows, again, his character and who he is. And he's a giving individual.
Right.
He's one of those people that was a quarterback but couldn't play quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, played quarterback for the Gophers, right?
Exactly. So they made him a defensive back. And so,
exactly.
So I think there's so many things that we continue to fight and or have to go through, as you know. I mean, some of this is not new to people, but our history is here and it's continued, and it's such a different time today. Our young athletes, they're very gifted.
Yes.
But they can go travel and play in AAU and see different parts of the country and play and eat food that, you know, like only the NCAA or Nike is going to buy. I traveled with.
That's a whole nother ball game.
Yeah, so my grandson Royce. So when he was playing,
Royce,
so when he was playing AAU, so he ended up getting invited to this global challenge, him and Rodney. And so we went out, the first year they played, it was out in Portland. And so I went out there and man, they were catering food for the athletes. And this global challenge, there were 8 teams from around the world and there were four USA teams and then 4 teams from out of the country. And then each year they brought in different people. But here was the place where they had food every day and where they stayed. I mean, it was catered food that was, I wish I could have ate there. And so it's funny because I stayed in a hotel not too far away. And so Roy said to me one day, he said, Grandpa, he said, man, can you stop and get me and Rodney a Big Mac on the way? I said, a Big Mac? I said, man, you better go in there and eat that food that's in there. He said, Grandpa, I don't like all that food. So it was funny to me. I mean, here was some highly catered meals, and he just wanted a Big Mac. It's funny to me, you know, because that's what he was, I guess, used to eating, and I understood that. But I think sometimes I think about our kids going to play, they get to travel, and they don't even, and I've shared this with Royce, you know, about his grandfather or his great-grandfather and his heritage, but even understanding that, man, you jump in the car and you go travel to play somewhere and you don't have the same kind of issues that your great-grandfather had when he played. You know, I mean, it's just a whole nother thing. It's a different time, but it's not a different time. So, I mean, they have, you know, people still have challenges.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they still move the goalposts when you get to a certain point.
Exactly. And then Royce has gone through a whole difficult thing, should still be in the NBA. But, you know, Grandpa, you know, and I know more of the story than what the media has published about him. And it's unfortunate. And someday, to a certain degree, as more people have come out, especially in the NBA, and talked about mental health and anxiety and that kind of stuff, you know, those guys have been, you know, Kevin Love and some of the other people that have come out. I mean, nobody treating them the way they treated my grandson.
No.
And capable of playing. And he went up to Canada a couple of years and played, and he just dominated the league. I would travel up there, and the first year he was MVP of the league. And they won the championship. The second year he led the league in scoring. He didn't get MVP. They gave it to a guy from Canada, which was okay, but he was still the top player. I mean, every time they played, I mean, he was the guy to stop. But he just dominated the league up there, and different than the NBA. And I wish he was still playing, because he has that ability to play. He just doesn't, I think, have the passion. But he's played in the Big Three. Last year they cut it off. He's been invited back to play this year, so I hope they do play. So I'd like to see him play. I love watching my grandson play. And
you guys check him out. Big Three. Hopefully, with this COVID-19, they'll still, you know, be successful with when that comes about. But be on the lookout for Royce White to be playing in the Big Three.
Yeah.
But also, I wanted to get sort of back to, like, with your book and the history of baseball in Minnesota with the black baseball players and the black baseball leagues. So can you just explain, was the Negro leagues in the state of Minnesota, and then there was other black leagues as well, correct?
Well, we never had a team in the Negro leagues here in Minnesota.
Okay.
But we had teams that beginning in the 30s, the Negro League teams would come here and they would play exhibition games.
Gotcha.
Against another Negro League team. So they would play either at Lexington Ballpark, which was at University in Lexington, and, or they would play at Nicollet Park, which was over in Minneapolis at Lake and I'm sorry, Lake and Nicollet.
Okay.
So both of those places, again, were stadiums that AAA teams had. So those teams continued to come through. So there were a lot of great Negro League players that would come with those teams and play. I know they would come and get my father to play sometimes to fill in. The
Was your father a catcher? I'm sorry to interrupt. Was your father a catcher? I think
he was a catcher.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. So, and if you saw my on my website, I've got a video that Kwame McDonald interviewed my father and Buck O'Neill in the Negro League Baseball Museum, where Buck talks about they attempted to recruit my father out of high school to play in the Negro Leagues, and but so then our teams here in Minnesota were really independent teams and generally weren't playing in a league because, again, of segregated baseball.
Right.
Even going back to the early 1900s, there was a team called the St. Paul Colored Gophers.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. That was my next question. I wanted you to go.
Dominated baseball in the Midwest. They, in fact, in 1909, they were proclaimed the Black National Champions.
Wow.
Because of all of the people that they beat, their record. So generally, their record in the 4 years that Phil Reed owned them, in 1911, they were purchased by another individual and Bobby Marshall, who played for Phil.
Bobby Marshall, for those that don't know, was a really good athlete, and I think he was the first black athlete of University of Minnesota. Am I not?
Yes, and they finally put him in the Football Hall of Fame over there several years ago, but it took a while for them even to recognize him.
Yeah.
So Phil Reed, their team, their record, generally they would play over 100 games, and their winning percentage was usually like 7 780 or 1 year was 823, which means like 8 out of 10 ball games.
Yeah.
And they were playing like the AAA teams. They were playing everybody. And they would be a big drawing card. People wanted to see that team play. So they were booked a lot of places. And I'm sure back in that time that part of the booking was, people, if you went up to, they would go up to Hibbing and play. Well, part of it is they wanted to see a great baseball game because Minnesota had this great baseball legacy. But, they were probably also at the time curious because a lot of people hadn't seen a black person. Mm-hmm. It was a dual kind of thing, probably more for the baseball, but I'm sure there was a curiosity.
Right.
So the Minneapolis Keystones, there was a guy named Kid Mitchell that owned the Keystone Hotel on Hennepin Avenue. After Phil Reed started his team, the St. Paul Colored Gophers, this guy, Kid Mitchell, ended up wanting to have his own team too. And so he had a very good team. In fact, Bobby Marshall played for him first. And then he came over to play with the Gophers. But so they were a very good team, but not as good as the Gophers. And in one of the series that they played, the Gophers won, I think, 3 out of 4. And then so they, even though everybody wanted to see them play against each other after that, they kind of stayed away from each other, but they had their own successes.
And with the Colored Gophers, you said they would just travel through the Midwest?
Yeah, they would travel into Canada. They would play in Wisconsin. They would play all over Minnesota, Iowa, and then they would play sometimes teams from Chicago.
Gotcha.
I think what's amazing to me, LaShawn, is that when I first started doing research, I couldn't figure out how Phil Reed had this connection, how he found ball players in Chicago.
Right.
But we had back in the like 1880s, 1890s, there were like 6 daily trains that went to Chicago from here. Mm-hmm. The connection, and when you got porters or people that are on the train, they would get there, they would bring the Chicago Defender back here, the newspaper, and just the oral information that was shared. So that's how they would find ball players. I couldn't figure out how do you keep finding these ball players, and they're from Chicago. Mm-hmm. And Phil Reed's team, the St. Paul Colored Gophers, his first team were all guys from Chicago.
Really?
He hired Walter Ball and sent him to Chicago to recruit the fastest team he could. Fastest meaning the best at the time. Mm-hmm. Their word. So I found that amazing. And part of that was because Chicago was a bigger place.
Exactly.
More baseball going on. Mm-hmm. And he did that, and they became this great team. But then like Bobby Marshall played here locally, and there was maybe one other guy. But that team pretty much stayed intact until a little bit later. And then as other black teams came along, there was in St. Paul, there was a team called the Uptown Sanitary Shop, which was a place that was down on Owen Howe was the owner. If people look up, he also owned a hotel on Rondo, and also was a very giving individual in our community, in our Rondo community in St. Paul. Then there was a team called the Ascot Marine Red Sox in Minneapolis, again, which created this rivalry across the river. And those tended to be, again, more local guys, not people that came from other places. And so there were a number of teams that continued all the way up until through the 40s. And then in about the mid-50s, baseball started to decline here. And people started playing fast-pitch softball because that was the game that became very popular at the time. And generally guys that played baseball, but there was a decline. I think in my research, there's a lot of guys that played baseball before they got to high school, but when they high school, they didn't play baseball. You'll see a lot of athletes that continued on and played maybe basketball or football or ran track.
Right.
They no longer play baseball. And my theory on that is, up until if Jackie Robinson signed in 45 and started Major League Baseball in 47, there was really no place to go. I mean, those guys that played, we still had segregated baseball. Teams weren't signing anybody, so there was no real future in baseball. And because we didn't have a Negro League team, the closest teams were in Kansas City or Chicago, which meant if you were going to go there and play and were good enough, you had to really leave here and or go up to Canada to play.
Right.
But we had a lot of very good baseball players, but they were multi-sport athletes too that were from here. So
and I remember when I went to the panel discussion 4 years ago, you guys mentioned that a lot of really good baseball players, because there wasn't no other opportunities, they ended up going doing other things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, depending upon the year, there's like in Minneapolis, there was a guy named Leroy Heidemann who Bud Grant said might have been the greatest amateur athlete of his era. And my father would say that Leroy, who has passed away, was like Michael Jordan of his time in Minneapolis. And so, great athlete. And then he would go on to play, baseball and fast pitch softball. There was a guy named Larry Bubba Brown who was also an outstanding athlete, and his brother was one of the Tuskegee Airmen. And there's Butch Davis, Harry Davis's son, Louis Boone, Ronnie Henderson. I mean, there are so many guys that were good over here in St. Paul. My father and I mentioned Floyd already, but Percy Zachary. Percy Zachary was a great football player, but he also played baseball, and he actually was all Big Ten his sophomore year at the University of Minnesota. And then I think I don't know that he completed staying at the University of Minnesota.
Right.
Again, an outstanding athlete, but he also played baseball, and then he went on to play fast pitch softball on an all-black team that Ted B sponsored. There was a great rivalry between Hallie Q. Brown and Phyllis Wheatley. I mean, that was if you played basketball or football for one of those organizations and you beat the other team that year, and you had rights for a year, right? So, in fact, I used to play a football game. Bubba Brown told me this and they would play sometimes at the old Sumner Field. Mm-hmm. It's no longer there. There's a little bit of it, but not much of it. Or they would play over here in St. Paul, and they called it the Chitlin Bowl.
The Chitlin Bowl.
Yeah. But we've got a long list of athletes. I mentioned Dick Blakely, Bob Blakely.
And I'm pretty sure a lot of these guys are in the book that you wrote.
Yeah, there's a lot of names in it, and I actually I'm working on a second book.
Good.
And in the second book, I'm calling The Spirit of the Rondo Athlete, 1940 to 1969. 3 decades. And what I'm doing in this book is if you played sports, even if it was midget football at Hallie Q. Brown, I'm going to mention that you played football at Hallie Q. Brown if I can identify who you were.
Right.
So I'm in the midst of, I can finally get back into the History Center, and I've gone through Marshall's yearbooks, I've gone through some of Mechanics, a few of Central's, but I've got a lot more to do. But some of the names that I'm coming across of some of the great athletes that I didn't even know about, and I'm using yearbooks as one of my sources. I've done the black newspapers, but in the yearbooks I can see an individual and who they are to help identify, not just a name.
Right.
And I'm finding out a lot of information. And in the books, I'll talk about that. I'll also talk about, not many people played golf, but we had a Twin Cities golf club or whatever, and so there were a lot of black golfers, and and so that's another sport. I know there's bowling, and I haven't figured out yet if I'm going to. I don't have enough resources again to identify people that did bowling, but for sure I'm going to talk about golfers. I'm going to. I probably won't. I will mention maybe next to somebody's name if they play baseball, but my goal is really to talk about if you played football, basketball, track, that type of things, the other sports. But I would still list if somebody played baseball, I'm going to list that they played baseball.
Right.
But my goal is not. My goal is to talk more about the other sports that people excelled at.
And we need those stories. We definitely need those stories because, like you said earlier, it just doesn't come out. It's overlooked, and just people are just not aware. And I think when people have access to that knowledge, it'll just, I'm telling you, for me personally, it just makes me feel good. And then it makes me challenge people who are from here and don't want to claim they're from here or what. I'm like, that you just sort of do a disrespect for your history before you were here, so and that's good to hear these stories.
Yeah, and you, not too long ago, you posted about golf, and I went back, and after you, I posted. But one of the things I wanted to talk about Jimmy Lee, people, first of all, Jimmy Lee Recreation Center in St. Paul, I had a number of people that would tell me, even staff members, even African-American staff members, until we put up a sign that showed who Jimmy Lee was, people would say, I never knew he was African-American.
See?
And I was like, oh my God.
And my dad told me that Jimmy Lee's from his hometown. He's from Vicksburg, Mississippi.
Yeah, exactly. And so when Jim came here, he played. He's actually on the cover of my book. I would find out, I didn't know at the time when in the picture, but in that team photo that I have, there are 3 individuals on my book. I've been able to identify all 3 of the individuals now, which is really a treasure to me. But Jimmy Lee is the person on the left side of the book, and so I identified him as playing baseball. But one of the other things is he was hired. He was a great golfer, and I didn't know that until later.
Yeah, I remember you reached out to me and told me that, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that was
Yes, and so he would write a column called Golf Divots. So he was hired to give tips how to play golf, and that went so well. That's when they actually changed it, and he changed it to say that it was called Jimmy Lee Sports Lights, and that was his column that he would mention if you played sports, whatever it is, boxing or baseball or football or track, he would write, like he was more like a Charlie Walters kind of thing. He didn't write big articles. He would write, small comments about this individual and this guy's doing well, that kind of thing. So he listed a lot of names. But then to find out that he won the first Negro Open golf tournament in 1939, I was blown away. I was like, wow.
Yeah, when you told me that, I was blown away. It's like, that's real cool. I was like, wow. And with that golf tournament and how major it was to the country and how people came here.
Yeah, exactly. People came here from all over the country to play in that golf tournament, and that was amazing. I mean, I didn't know. As I was older, I knew about the bronze tournament, but I didn't know that it was called the Negro Open when it first began until I started doing research. So like at the Jimmy Lee Recreation Center in St. Paul, we now have a sign with a little bit of his history. And my goal is to put more signs like that up throughout the community and share information and show a visual of who that person is. So even St. Paul, the city of St. Paul now has put up a playground, and they've got an image of a basketball official there, and it's got Jimmy Lee's name at the bottom and out on the playground. And so one of the other places I'm working with the MLK tennis buffs, there's a gentleman named Ernie Duke Green, who actually was a great tennis player and was ranked nationally as a senior tennis player, African American. And when I was the director at the King Center, he came to me one time and said, I'd like to do tennis lessons here. I said, oh, okay, because we didn't have them.
Right.
Well, it was in the 70s. And little did I know that in my research, I found that he actually started tennis lessons back in the 50s at Halleck Brown. But we're putting up a brand new sign, a big sign, 22 feet long, that says the Ernie Duke Green tennis courts. And the MLB tennis buffs are paying for that sign. And there's another place where we need to do more of that. Like Tony Stone Field, the baseball field.
Mm-hmm.
This woman that's from St. Paul was in Bluefield, West Virginia, but they moved here when she was about 10, so people consider her from St. Paul. So she's been more documented recently than ever before. But when they named this field back in 1996, they named Dunning Field Stadium after Tony Stone. But in all of the facility information that the city and the school district, when they put schedules out, when Central would put out their baseball schedule, they would put Dunning Field. So I challenged the city and the school district, said, you know, if this was called George Washington Field, you would put George Washington Field. But you named it, the city named it Tony Stone Field, and you're not calling it. That's a slap in the face.
Right. And I'm glad that you're sharing things like this, because these are things that we don't even think about. Like if I'm driving over by there and I just see names or whatever, I might not know the history of the person to name, and then the work that goes behind the scenes, like you just explained how you had to challenge people. And we need to take pride in that and knowing that this is some of the stuff that some of our people had to put a fight up just to get signs and have people to do right by us.
Exactly. And at the King Center, we'll put up another sign inside that has Duke's image to show that he is also African American. Otherwise, people look at that sign and we won't even think that it's possible that could even be a person of color, right? Or a Black person.
Yeah. And then I think that might, to a certain extent, might go with why people, you know, what I've always heard, that there's not Black people in Minnesota, or not a lot of Black people in Minnesota, and people don't want to say that they from here.
Right. But we have, you know, so we've got Roy Wilkins Auditorium.
Yes.
Graduated from McKenna Arts High School in St. Paul. We've got Frank Boyd Park, and they have a bust of him up on Selby. It's bordered by Selby on the south and Dayton on the north. And I think Virginia and Farrington are the streets, but people don't even know about that. And Frank Boyd was really involved in creating a union here for Pullman porters, and did work and additional other things where he was involved in civil rights, but people don't know about him. And so there's another park named after him, Father Carty Park. I think now it's called People's Park. But so the more we do this, in fact, I've got a proposal with the St. Paul School District right now. Tony Stone, and right now, Tony Stone, as she grew up, in the last place she lived with her parents before she moved to California was at 551 Carroll.
Okay.
Been between Kent and McCubbin. Well, today, if you're on Carroll Avenue, it dead ends at Dale Street, and then it picks up again on McCubbin. So there's a 2-block area that Carroll no longer exists because the school is there.
And this is in St. Paul, people, for those that don't know.
Right, yeah, sorry. And a big playfield. So I know that 551, and I'm working with St. Paul Schools and the superintendent. My proposal is that in that school building, if we put on a map 551 Carroll, it would literally be in the school building. So I want to put up a permanent exhibit of Tony Stone on the closest wall to where we can locate where she lived in that building. So again, so kids that are growing up, they can look at that exhibit and go, she's from here? Well, not only is she from here, she lived right here in this spot. I mean, how big of an impact would that be for kids?
Yeah.
When,
Before
so,
somebody else claims, before somebody else claims our history like they've done with other things. So,
exactly.
you know,
And not
it's
only for
good that,
people of,
or go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, not only for people of color, but also for young ladies of color. I mean,
Yeah,
African American. Just think what
exactly.
made them feel about all of what Tony Stone had to go through at the time, playing a man's game and getting to the level of playing in the Negro Leagues, which was the professional level. Think of everything she had to go through.
Yeah, I remember you guys talking about her at the panel discussion. I mean, her story alone is just remarkable. But I mean, I could just go all night with you, Mr. White, because you're just dropping knowledge. I'm going to have to wrap it up, but before I do, I wanted you to talk a little bit about because a lot of people don't know, maybe true baseball fans in Minnesota know, but can you talk about when Willie Mays played for the Minneapolis Millers?
Sure. And people will remember Willie. They hear that story. He lived over on 4th Avenue and pretty much almost walking distance to Nicollet Park when he played there. He was here for about 34 games, literally a little bit more than a month.
Mm-hmm.
And while he was here, he hit like almost 500. I mean, he had a tremendous career to play baseball. And so they brought him here, and then they took him back within a month because he was
in a month. Okay.
and the Giants wanted him to they wanted him to play at the major league level. But in addition to Willie Mays, they also had Monty Irvin that played there.
Mm-hmm.
The third baseman. I can't think of. Ray Dandridge also was playing again with the Millers at the same time. Never got to the major leagues, but played in the Negro Leagues, but he's in the Hall of Fame. So we had a number of people, and then a short time before that, in 1948, Roy Campanella came here to play for the St. Paul Saints, and he was here for, again, about 35 games and did so well. The Dodgers brought him up away. Right. Roy Campanella goes to major leagues, and in a 5-year period of time, he wins maybe about 6-year period of time, he wins 3 MVP awards in the National League. So we've got some great black ball players that have come through the Minneapolis and St. Paul.
And that's what I'm saying. It's just it's all kind of these stories, and like you said, like Willie Mays was here briefly, but he made a loud mark here.
Oh,
and those other players that you just mentioned.
Yeah, and then in basketball, Elgin Baylor played here. Yeah. Elgin Baylor used to come down and play pickup basketball at Oxford out on the blacktop out there. Earl Batty, same thing. I mean, we've had such outstanding people, and so when young people today if they hear the name Elgin Baylor, they're thinking Los Angeles
Lake, but he started
they're not thinking Minneapolis Lakers.
Right.
And he lived in the Rondo neighborhood, so.
Wow. Yeah. So right before you go, just talk about, well, you have throughout this interview that some of the things that you've done behind the scenes, but what are some of the things you have been doing within like the last year and to the present? I know we're going through COVID, but you mentioned to me that you have been doing work with the Twins. So what are some of the things that you are doing right now?
This will be my 21st season working for the Minnesota Twins on a contractual basis. I run their RBI program, which is reviving baseball in inner cities.
Good.
And so Bill Peterson and Steve Winfield and some other individuals helped me run that program, and we put on clinics for people in both Minneapolis and St. Paul. That's been a really great opportunity for me. I still am connected to basketball. I'm an observer for basketball officials. I'm also currently in the last year as one of the board of directors for the Minnesota State High School League, which has been an honor and a learning experience for me. I'm writing articles on a number of individuals. I am I am researching the book that I talked about. Has some, and then I'm helping Hallie Q. Brown in a number of capacities, putting together some different pieces of history. So if you call Dawn Selly over there, she would say, if she did, because she's not from here, she said, well, let me contact a couple of my resources. And generally, I'm one of those resources.
Right.
As is Marvin Anderson or Norm Speed Rawlings. So I'm staying really involved in history and really attempting to acknowledge and increase awareness of African Americans, as I said in the beginning, in primarily St. Paul. However, I will be working in Minneapolis, but because I grew up in St. Paul, I don't know as many people in Minneapolis that should be recognized. But if I know about them, I'm surely going to talk about them.
Definitely. And I just want my people to be on the lookout for all those things. Support Mr. White with his book that is called They Played for the Love of the Game. I just really appreciate you coming here. And if there's anything that you need me to do with this platform of bringing awareness to what you what you have done and what you're going to be doing, I'm all for it.
I really appreciate, LaShawn, the opportunity. Anytime that I can help share some of the research and knowledge that I have, I really enjoy that, because I want to honor those men and women that have come before us and people just don't know about, and they deserve to be recognized and honored, and I think that's important for me. It's important for you. And any of your listeners, it's important for them to learn and also then carry that on to somebody else that needs to know, their family. I think sometimes we live every day and we forget that we today in technology, everybody's taking pictures with their phones, but
yeah.
I tell you how many pictures, hard copies that I've seen, and Anthony Scott is carried on with some books and photos, and it's our history. But the challenge is, I tell people today, if you have pictures at home, take some time, go to your pictures and write on the back, if you know what that date was and what it was about and who the people are, because someday that's going to be history and somebody's going to be looking at that and say, I wonder what this was about, and you have an opportunity, even if it's your family,
That's a good point.
Things happen so, time goes by so quick. All of a sudden today, it's like, oh, we're enjoying today. And then a little bit down the road is history and you're remembering. But if you don't take that and share that with your family, I think that's the other thing. My father, bless his heart, didn't really talk about his how good he was as an athlete. I found out from other people. I found out that the Negro League teams would come and get him to play, and
Right.
and I said, Dad, why didn't you ever tell me that? He said, oh, it wasn't important. I was like, What wasn't important?
I think what you're saying is, it's good to live in a moment, but it's better to document the moment so it can last long, from generation to generation to generation. Because if that's lost, then we don't know where we're going.
Absolutely, and I think you said earlier about people not necessarily wanting to say where they're from. That's part of our individual and our family history. That needs to be shared with our family. I mean, I talk to so many people that, I wish my dad would have told me, or I wish my mom would have said, and I'm one of those individuals.
Yeah.
My dad would have shared more with me.
Right.
And so I'm finding it out through other sources and searching. So,
well, definitely, I really appreciate you coming here. And anytime you want to come back on here to promote anything or bring awareness to something, the door is open for you. And then if anything that you need me to do again, I'm all for it.
LaShawn, man, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
All right. Bless you. Ladies and gentlemen, Frank White. All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay.